All right, this is going to be a quick video walking you through the steps of how to introduce a global learning outcome into a new course that you're trying to globalize or internationalize. Now, there are a lot of steps of this process, and from the outset, it might seem like all you have to do is design a couple of activities that seem to support the global learning outcome, and then we dropped all of these other concepts on you, and we asked you to have objectives that tie to competencies, which tie to outcomes, and have an assessment that ties it all together. And I'm thinking you might be overwhelmed by all of this. So all I want to do in this video is walk you through that process, give you a hypothetical example, and how you might design activities and assessments to support the outcome that you've chosen. So it's a lot, but hopefully by picking one specific outcome and kind of walking you through it, it'll seem more manageable. So that's the purpose of this. Let's minimize down there. I have here a list of the AAC&U learning outcomes, global learning outcomes. So they have 6, and each of them have 4 levels of achievement. So there are, so in each of these would be, they actually call these competencies within the global learning outcome. And so each of these competencies has 4 levels of achievement. So you can be very low entry level or like achieve mastery. And just to give you an idea, when students enter college, they're between 1 and 2 on average. So if we look at a bunch of state universities, they tend to have very rudimentary grasp of these competencies. And so overall, their achievement of the AAC&U global learning outcome, like the overall outcome, is very poor. But ideally, over the course of 4 years, they grow. So it isn't one course that achieves an outcome. It's many, many courses designed by different faculty who have their different approaches to it, which meet students in different ways. And when those are all combined, there is this cumulative effect where students kind of grow along that axis. And what we'd like to see is that students hit between 2 and 3, but ideally 3 and up to 4, and we'll talk about kind of what that means. And so I want to use the example of the outcome of global self-awareness, and I also want to talk about how outcomes, competencies, objectives, and course activities fit together. So again, the outcome is very broad, it's very extensive, and it takes a long time, a lot of dedicated courses to supporting that one outcome over a series of years before we can talk about achievement or improvement. Now, those outcomes can be broken down into competencies, and the competencies each support the outcome. So again, the outcome is maybe, I think for ASU, it's diversity awareness. So how aware are students of diversity in the world in all of its forms? So we have, for example, self-awareness. We choose that as one of the really important competencies to support diversity awareness. And so that's the one that I kind of want to focus on. But that's just one of multiple competencies. And so we have the outcome, we have competencies that fit within that outcome. So one is self-awareness, one is awareness of culturally different others. So again, do we understand the cultural context of ourselves? Do we understand the cultural contexts of others? So those are 2 similar, they're related, but we're looking at 2 different ways. Can we look at ourselves that way in a third-person way? And can we appreciate others in that same way without judging them, without evaluating them, but kind of appreciating the context in which they are? And then finally, for ASU, we have knowledge of global differences. So for example, Dr. Osakwe had mentioned, do students know how many countries are in Africa? And do they recognize which countries are in Africa, not Europe? This is knowledge about or international facts, statistics, things like that. How much knowledge do students have? And in our assessment, students actually have a lot of knowledge about international, intercultural, inter-belief systems, and ethnicity differences. It's the perspective taking that our students tend to struggle with. So let's just say, for example, that in your course you chose global self-awareness. So you teach sociology, or you teach education, you teach chemistry, and what you want to introduce as the globalization component is, can students recognize themselves as cultural, or within a cultural context? So not, I have my belief systems because they're correct, or I have my belief systems and values because they're the best. It's, I have my cultural belief systems and values because of the coincidence of where I was born and how I was raised and the people that I've interacted with and the values that I confront on the internet and through media and so on. And so if that was your objective, or if that was the competency that you chose, then you would want to pick out maybe a couple of repeat activities, repeat objectives in your course that you'll revisit over the course of several weeks, where they'll be asked to do maybe a self-reflection. Reflect on how your family's influenced you. Reflect on how your closest friends have influenced you. Reflect on how, and so all of these activities would be maybe self-reflection might be an objective that you use to support global self-awareness. And so it might start with simple self-reflection, and then you start to introduce how were your values shaped? How was your religion shaped? And so they start off with just self-reflection, and then you're like introducing these cultural concepts that maybe they never thought about as cultural concepts. They took them for granted. But because you've introduced them in the sequence, this self-reflection activity has yielded depth of understanding of their own global self-awareness. So again, we have that big competency, the specific self-reflection objective, and then activities that build on each other. So that's just one possible objective there. Another one might be talking in groups and sharing what you've written about, so you can hear other people do it and you can start to see them the way you're looking at yourself, and there'll be a contradiction that sort of happens there, and they'll have to reconcile it. Well, wait a minute, you're sort of like me, but you have different you have different values. How did that happen? How are my values different from your values? And so you might have discussions as an activity, and then there might be visitations, like maybe you'll have students go do a cultural experience, immersive cultural experience, and that might be the third objective. Again, all supporting the global self-awareness. And there's those three objectives, each of which have a series of activities tied to them. That's an awful lot, but space that over 15 weeks. You might have one class period per week where you introduce one of these components, and so you do self-reflections every Friday, maybe once a month you do like an immersive cultural activity. Maybe you have students share their responses with or their reflections with other students every other week. So in other words, you keep revisiting the same outcome from a variety of perspectives. Those different points of attack would sort of be like your objectives, and then the activities would be instances of each of those objectives. So what I've done was kind of talked about the nested relationship between these concepts. So what you'll have to do is pick out the overarching outcome you're interested in. So let's say it's global self-awareness, and then decide on how you want to approach it. Now, to accomplish that, I'm going to share with you the institutional option, which is the diversity awareness for Albany State University. So this here is the outcome. Students will demonstrate understanding of diverse peoples, cultures, and perspectives. Now, AAC&U lists 6 possible competencies. We chose 3, so a group of about 30 of us, I believe, voted on them and came up with these 3. One of them is this self-awareness, cultural self-awareness, and I think I shared this earlier, knowledge of other cultural frameworks, or worldview frameworks, and then attitudes of openness. So actually, when I went through them earlier, I had misremembered this one here. And so how open are students, this last one, how open are students to considering and maybe appreciating or valuing perspectives that are different from their own? How willing are they to let go of like being right and having the best perspective, and sort of suspend that to consider culturally different others? So those are the 3. So if you chose cultural self-awareness and that's the only one you want to focus on, notice the very basic entry-level step to this achieving this competency is showing minimal awareness of cultural rules and biases. If that's the very first step, then you could design activities around that. So at first you might ask them to reflect on their values, and that right there, if they can make a link to the cultural context of the values that they have, you've already got them showing minimal awareness, and you can look at the graded steps and so where you go from there. Can they recognize biases, not even accept them or critique them, but just recognize biases? Are there any biases that other people have? Are there any biases that you have? Now, that's not something you do in 10 minutes. Like, that's going to be a series of activities. First, they recognize other people's biases. They're wrong. It's easy to do that. But then can you turn that view inward and critique your own values as if from another perspective? So as you can see, that's going to take like all semester long, and all you're doing is focusing on this one competency. I've talked about the big outcome, and so we already have those established at ASU, and then choosing a specific competency. So that would be like cultural self-awareness, and then your objectives might be students will reflect on their own personal experience. Students will share the self-reflections with others, culturally different others in class, and the culturally immersive experience. So let's just say those are the 3 objectives you chose, and for each of them you have 5 activities. That's 15 different activities covering 3 objectives, all of which support the one competency that you've selected. So that's how they all fit together. Now let's say you want to assess it. How do you assess how well they're doing? Well, it might be as simple as collecting their reflections on the first day of class. If you want to do a baseline, that's not necessary, by the way. We have plenty of data to show that students are coming in between a 1 and a 2. On average, some of them are 0, some of them are 3, but the majority of them are like 1.2, 1.3, so very, very low here. But if you want to kind of see exactly what that stepwise progression is, so you can see what's working out, have them do a self-reflection where they have an opportunity to demonstrate their cultural self-awareness. And then take it and use this rubric and say, okay, did they show any awareness of cultural rules and biases? If so, all right, they've got 1. What about here? Do they recognize and understand their biases? If so, then they've got at least a 2. Move up here. Do they... So this is other people's values. Do they do the same cultural value recognition in themselves? If so, like they moved on to 3, and then finally, can they articulate this in a complex way, kind of recognizing that there are gradations and gray areas in it? That's it. You go through each of them, give them a score between 0 and 4, maybe collect the class average and see where they're at, and then make a note of it, maybe keep a couple of examples that are good and examples that are bad. Set them aside, come back at the end of the semester after you've had all those 15 activities that support the 3 objectives, which filter into that one outcome you've selected, and then do the same thing. Give them don't give them the same one, because then you're having other learning effects. Maybe they've learned how to answer that one question. Give them a different question, but give them an opportunity to demonstrate this skill, and then go through it again. Use this rubric, check out, give them grades between 0 and 4, add up the averages, and what you'd have is you could actually do a t-test and see if the differences in means, if there's an improvement, is it a statistically significant difference? It depends on how exactly you want to be in that research. I would prefer a more qualitative approach, asking students I'd be looking at their reflections and maybe seeing how many different cultural values and beliefs and stuff that they recognize, and how they integrate them into understanding maybe their own identity or the identity of someone else, and maybe like insights that they gain. Like you can kind of see those aha moments, and that's something that's really important to me. Like when I'm assessing this, I want to see that recognition. Like, oh, wait a minute, last night I had this realization that like my religion is sort of shaped by like where I grew up. Like that to me may not show up on an assessment, but when it happens, I like record that. Like that to me is pretty significant. So decide for yourself what you want to use to sort of show an improvement. But what I wanted to do in this video again was just kind of show how each of those concepts fit together, how you'll design activities that support objectives that filter into an overarching outcome. But again, you'll want to choose which of these, probably 1. I wouldn't recommend doing more than that. It's possible to do 6, but then that's all you're going to do all semester long. Pick 1, think creatively about it, see how it fits into your curriculum, and then put together a couple of activities. You can use this assessment style. I'll share our rubric with Dr. Sakwe so she can pass it along to you. Let's see if there's anything else that I want to add. And you can have students give presentations, you can do posters, write discussion posts, open response questions, essays. Any of those are useful as assessment artifacts. You just take them and then use the rubric while you listen to them or interview them or watch a presentation or read their essay. It doesn't matter what shape the artifact comes in. Or if you like a more statistical approach and you want to give multiple choice questions that test knowledge or self-awareness biases, things like that. Maybe you can have some fun looking up sample questionnaires or evaluations. Anyway, if you have any more questions, let me know. I'm happy to help with you. I think you'll have a mentor assigned to you so you can follow up with them. But hopefully this made it seem a little bit simpler for you.